In this lesson, we're going to go through speed and velocity. You may have heard those terms used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So let's start with speed. So speed is the rate at which an object covers distance. It's a scalar quantity, so meaning there isn't a direction attached to it. The units that we use are meters per second, and an example of a speed would be 25 meters per second. Now, when you're driving your car, you've got a speedometer on your car. It tells you how fast you're going. So the instantaneous speed is the speed at any given instant in time. So your speedometer is telling you how fast you're going in your car at that moment. The average speed is the average of all instantaneous speeds. So, for example, if you're going from Joliet to Chicago, let's say it's 35 miles, Google is going to figure out how long it's going to take you to go from Joliet to Chicago, and it's going to give you an average time. And it does that by averaging the distance, coming up with an average idea of how fast you're going to go, and that average speed helps us figure out how fast we're going. So the average speed is like how fast you were going over the whole trip. We find the average speed by taking the total distance divided by the total time. So again, if we were going to Chicago, our distance would be 35 miles, and let's say that it took us an hour to get there. So that would be what we would plug into our equation. So here's an example. It says, while on vacation, Lisa Carr traveled a total distance of 440 miles. Her trip took 8 hours. What was her average speed? So the formula for average speed is distance divided by time. So the total distance that Lisa Carr was traveling was 440 miles. And it took her 8 hours. So on your calculator, you would do 440 divided by 8. And if you do the math there, 440 divided by 8 gives you an answer of 55. And our units are right here. Our units are going to be miles per hour. So another term that you may have heard used interchangeably with speed is velocity. Velocity is the rate at which an object changes position. So velocity is a vector quantity, so meaning it has a direction. So the unit for velocity, the standard unit, is meters per second. So an example of velocity, and remember velocity always has a direction, is 15 meters per second east. Average velocity is calculated by finding the change in position divided by the change in which that occurred. Okay, so average velocity. In math, we use this delta symbol, this triangle symbol. That just means the change in velocity. And the average velocity is actually the slope of our position versus time graph. So let's take a look at the difference here. Okay, so it says in the diagram below, you started on the dot and you walked 2 meters north, 4 meters east, 2 meters south, 4 meters west. The motion lasted for 24 seconds. Determine the average speed and the average velocity. Let's start by finding the distance. So the distance, we just add up all of the distances that we covered. So we covered 2 meters here, 4 meters here, another 2 meters here, and finally another 4 meters here. Okay, so my total distance is 12 here. It says this took 24 seconds. So our formula for average speed is distance over time the total distance that I covered was 12 meters, and it lasted for 24 seconds. 12 divided by 24 is 0.5, and my units are going to be meters per second. Now, velocity is different. Velocity is our change in position. We started and ended on the same spot. Our position didn't change. So, since our position didn't change, it took place over 24 seconds. 0 divided by 24 is just going to be 0 meters per second. So, as you can see, there is a difference here. So because we have direction, because we have position change for velocity, we get a much different answer than we do if we're just calculating speed.